chainers, wherever you are in the world. This is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain. I forgot to bring myself up on the screen. I was watching the video and everything. Anyways, hello everybody and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And we have a really exciting show here for you today. We've got Sarah, the CEO of the Anti-Slavery Collective. And you might be wondering, what does that have to do with supply chains? Well, it's got everything to do with supply chains, and you might be responsible. Well, before I get into what's happening at Let's Talk Supply Chain, let's talk about our show sponsor. So our show is sponsored by Secret Society of Supply-Chain.com. Now, if you're looking for a community of like-minded professionals, we've got that community for you. So head over to Secret Society of Supply-Chain.com and check out the latest. We've got the Supply Chainers group with some exclusive content. We've got Women in Supply Chain Connections, executives. We're also partnering with Supply Chain Brain on the Supply Chain Marketing Masters program as well for marketing professionals in supply chain. All right, we've got a lot to get to today. If you are watching and in the audience, I want to know where you're watching from, so make sure to put that in the comments. Plus, you might have some questions for us today, so make sure you put that in the comments as well, even if it's just an emoji, a fire emoji, a heart emoji, whatever that looks like, to let us know that you are here and watching. All right. So what's new at Let's Talk Supply Chain? Well, we've got a brand new Woman in Supply Chain episode with Nikki Driscoll, episode 447. Now, we talk all about her journey in supply chain, what that's looked like, and her advice really for other professionals in supply chain. Lots of really great insights and takeaways wherever you listen to the show, Apple, Spotify, even over on YouTube. Go and check it out. That's episode 447. Later on today, actually at 2 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be hosting a webinar with Supply Chain Brain and Anaplan, the untold story of supply chain, the hidden impact of integrated business planning. Now, hopefully I'm going to see you there. The link to register is in the comment. If you haven't registered yet, go and register. This is going to be a really great conversation. And then tomorrow, I am hosting a webinar in conjunction with our friends over at BlackBerry Radar. We're talking about supply chain technology integration with Titanium, Isaac Instruments, and BlackBerry Radar. Now, this is super important, and I get this question all the time. Technology is great, but what does their integration look like? What does it mean to me? What does my onboarding look like? And so much more. Well, we're going to be answering all of that questions, or all of those questions. So register at the link in the comments, and I will see you there tomorrow. And then on Thursday, I'm hosting another webinar with CargoWise, Landside, and Supply Chain Brain, how to elevate your container drayage operations to maximize profit and growth. Remember, registration link in the comments. Go and register today, and I will see you Thursday. And then next Tuesday, I'm going live with WSI and Supply Chain Brain for why your 3PL partner may change in 2025. Lots of great content coming out, hosting some really great conversations. I hope to see you there. So again, go register at the comments. And then I have just come out. You might have known my LinkedIn newsletter called The Monthly Hustle. Well, it's got a full rebrand and refresh. This came out yesterday. It's now called The Monthly Pop, which is progress over perfection. I'm now out of my hustle era and wanted to share with you why. And so I do this in this particular article. We've also launched my brand new website and so much more. So go and check that out. Links in the comments. Let me know what you think, because we've got a brand new brand and so much more. Last but not least, in-person events. Where will I be? February 10th through 12th, going to be at Manifest in Vegas. March 2nd through 5th, I'm going to be in Long Beach, California for TPM, and I'll be hosting TPM TV. And then May 21st and 22nd, I'm going to be at Home Delivery World. So hopefully I will see you all there. But now it is time to bring up our guest for today. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you doing, Sarah? Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. I mean, we've been talking about you coming on Thoughts and Coffee, how you're going to be focusing on supply chains in 2025 for so long. And now we get to do this today. I can't say good morning because you're in the UK.
I
So it's
am.
already just a little bit past lunch hour for you. But for everybody who doesn't know who you are, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Sarah. So my name is Sarah too. I am the CEO of the Anti-Slavery Collective. We're a small advocacy communication agency that wields a pretty mighty convening power. We were established in 2017. And we obviously, from an advocacy perspective, cover all forms of modern slavery and human trafficking. But really, our organization is laser focused on forced labor, which obviously is the most significant form of modern slavery when it comes to supply chains. And we specialize as an organization in fashion and tech. So those are kind of our main priority areas, given that this is such a giant global topic.
Well, and so you're focusing on fashion and tech. Tech is obviously a big part of supply chain. We've got a lot of technology emerging across the supply chain from sourcing to last mile delivery. And fashion, actually, next week, I'm going to be honored at an event around circular fashion and some of our work in that and being able to tell that story. And so I know fashion is a big part of this, but I also know that some of the big retailers outsource their supply chains as well. So I'm interested to get into a little bit of that, like who's responsible, what does that look like? And we're going to be talking a lot about that. Before we do, I do want to get to the poll of the week because we've got a lot of great people who want to see what we've talked to the community about in the last week. So the question, what's your biggest roadblock to improving supply chain visibility? Well, 38% of you said data accuracy. Now that doesn't really surprise me because we're still trying to trust that data. We're still trying to trust that data. I had Amber Sally of Gaines on the show just a few weeks ago talking about how humans bring bias into data. And I bet you didn't think about that when you think about your outcomes. All right. 26% of you said budget constraints, 20% of you said lack of tools, and 16% of you said supplier collaboration. Now, that's over 137 votes. Now, Sarah, I know you're not in supply chain. You're in, obviously, forced labor. Supply chain is a big component of that. Is there anything here that can relate back to sort of the visibility around forced labor and supply chain?
Well, it's interesting that the data accuracy is the highest scoring roadblock because, I mean, obviously I'm not looking at it from a specific supply chain, from a kind of organizational perspective. I'm really more at a kind of helicopter kind of viewpoint. But for me, data sharing has got to be the biggest roadblock at the moment because nobody shares data. Nobody is incentivized to stand up and say, we found a problem. We don't want anyone else to find the same problem. We're prepared to stand up and share this issue, whether it's a human rights issue, it could be a sustainability kind of a kind of pollution issue. It doesn't matter any of the issues within sustainability. But unfortunately, organizations are just not incentivized to do that. They find an issue. They either, if you're lucky, immediately address that issue, or if you're not so lucky, they'll try and bury it and kind of conceal it. So for me, sharing data between kind of allies and partners is what I believe to be the kind of the biggest opportunity for supply chain visibility going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it doesn't take somebody forcing us to do it. I think last week on Thoughts and Coffee, I talked about an article where some of the food companies had come together
Yes.
around ingredients and traceability around ingredients, and they didn't have regulations around it. There wasn't anybody forcing them into doing it. It was just sort of the right thing to do. So, I agree with you. I think that should have been on the list, and hopefully, if we put that on the list, it would have been a little bit higher.
Absolutely. And I think the food and beverage industry is really interesting because, I know you're based in Canada, but in the UK, they have also been a real front runner on this. And again, not because they've been, forced into this or, they've been forced out of legislation. They've just come together as a group of allies to say, look, we can do this better and we will improve everybody's accountability if we share data.
Yes, it's so, so true. All right. So now we get into the point where I sort of ask you for a bit of a market update. Now, you and I talked at the beginning of the show or before we even got on the show about how you just came back from Davos. And I know that forced labor and the work that you do is highly recognized and a topic of conversation at Davos. Can you talk to us a little bit about Davos if people don't know what that is, and then talk to us about, what the conversations were like? What were you hearing? What is top of mind for everybody?
Well, I mean, that explains my slightly lower than normal voice because I'm still recovering from Davos. It is, I don't know, it was my first time. I don't know if anyone's ever been before, but it is an absolute circus. It's crazy. The hours you keep are crazy. But, there's a lot of schmoozing, but there's also a lot of people there who are desperate to share insights, to build a community of practice, to kind of find like-minded partners. So in many ways, it is the perfect place to be for this. I was there primarily to attend the launch of the Global Data Partnership on Forced Labor. So this is absolutely brand new, launched last week. It's been
Wow.
spearheaded by the World Economic Forum, which is now modern slavery and human trafficking is back on the World Economic Forum agenda. So they've spearheaded it with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, who are just such a progressive player in this area. Obviously, they've got absolutely enormous supply chains, but they're doing some really ambitious, progressive work in this area. And they're working pretty closely with another great partner of ours, Exeger, who are a supply chain visibility oversight specialist based in DC, but operating globally. And I think they're two really interesting partners. Exeger are amazing because they connect to so many clients, so they're constantly listening to what people are facing, in many different types of supply chains, and their data I think is going to be completely transformative to that partnership. So there was quite a bit of buzz about that, and I was really happy to be there to witness that. And obviously we are a partner of that new objective as well, so that new project.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I've had Frances Edmonds, she's the head of sustainability at HP Canada,
Uh-huh.
on the show multiple times talking about obviously sustainability. Forced labor has been part of that conversation, but she is very much a proponent that change in sustainability starts with procurement.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see that they're taking some of the work that she's done, and she's been highly dedicated to this work, and moving it into sort of that global data sharing platform that you're talking about, to really take it a little bit more global and tell people or give people an idea of what is actually possible.
And I think in terms of risk management, sharing data is so important, but also in terms of reporting.
Yes.
So I was at a meeting at the end of last year, and I heard a woman from Microsoft speak about their supply chain. And as you can imagine, just incredibly complex. They have 11 tiers, and in their tier 1 and 2, there's already kind of 200 suppliers who they sign contracts with. As they move down those tiers, you're talking about tens of thousands of suppliers.
Mhm.
So in terms of being able to request information from each of those suppliers down all 11 tiers, it's just simply not manageable. And I feel like when we're talking about data sharing, we're also talking about reporting, because if we could find more efficient ways to report, then it would save all those businesses who are just dying under a mountain of paperwork and dying 1,000 audit deaths. Streamlining that process is so vital to that supply chain being efficient.
Yeah. How do we make it easier and not harder? Like, I almost feel like we have to get back to the simple method, like keep it simple. Because if we don't keep it simple, people shy away, paused in panic, and they just won't move forward or take action on it. And so I think you're right. I mean, with that kind of volume, how do you keep on top of that? And we're going to talk about some stuff in a little bit for directors. If you're a board or if you're a director on a board that has anything to do with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 and below, you actually have probably more responsibility than you think that you do. So stay tuned, because we're going to talk about that. But let's get into our first article. So the first article is about sustainability trends businesses must watch in 2025. And you're probably going, "Oh, here we go, sustainability." Oh, and before we get into this, I do want to give a shout out. Wendy, Sumbel, Berta, over on my personal LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining in and for commenting. Now, you're probably like, "Here we go, sustainability trends." But no, this article is fascinating. I would highly recommend you go and read it, because basically they're taking everything that we know about sustainability, kind of throwing it out the window for 2025 and rejigging it in how we need to be thinking about sustainability. And it's not necessarily just or even ESG specific. They're changing the mindset around how companies and organizations and professionals are thinking about sustainability. One of the new terms that came out of this for me was green talent. Apparently, we don't have enough green talent, and everybody's looking for green talent. So, if you're not in sustainability and you're looking to go into sustainability, you might find a home there in green talent. Before I go any further, and one other thing, actually, regulations in government, it seems like they're going to be driving sustainability efforts. We're seeing a lot more of that in the EU than we are in North America. So what did you think about this article, Sarah? How does it sort of tie into the work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, it was an incredible article, really detailed and pulling all those different strands together. I mean, what's interesting to me, for me, again, as just kind of going off what you said, was the new EU legislation, because that is something that everybody is chattering about in London, and it was talked about a lot in Davos. The CSRD and the CSDDD, I think, is really going to fundamentally change the landscape for big businesses. It's got a pretty high income threshold at the moment, so it's obviously only applicable to a smallish number of big global corporates. But I think it's a really big gear shift. These companies are now, their boards are on the hook when it comes to this stuff, and it's everything under the sustainability umbrella. Mm-hmm. So, it used to be that if modern slavery was found within your supply chain somewhere, or exploitation, extreme exploitation, it would just be a kind of local issue. But now that goes all the way to the top, just in the same way that fraud used to be, has always been, let's say. So I think it's really going to change things. I wonder, because no one's actually reported yet. It's still kind of just starting. But I mean, it'll be really interesting to revisit this conversation in a year and see the kind of changes that it's had.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I mean, I think this is an ongoing sort of challenge. And I think as technology comes into play and we figure out how to use it and we figure out how to share data, there's more and more examples and stories that can come out of it. Just a couple of highlights from this particular article. So they're saying that organizations are going to leverage sustainability to improve products. They're going to look for high impact solutions around sustainability. They want reporting to explain contribution to global warming. So if you have a high carbon footprint, the regulations and the governments are going to ask you to report as to why you think you need to have that high of a carbon footprint. I mean, no longer are the days of we're going to reduce it by this much by 2030. It's now, if you haven't done that, explain to us why you haven't done that and why it's still so high. I mean, that changes, I think, everything. But also, family offices are looking to invest in ESG. So they're actually taking family offices and the private wealth is taking responsibility in investing in some sustainability solutions as well, which I think is interesting, because I said regulation and governments are going to help drive the sustainability efforts, but also private wealth and private money are getting into the game as well. And they're also talking about how risk is not just financial, and sustainability is a bit of a VC strategy as well. So lots of things to read in that particular article. It sort of changed my perspective on how we're thinking about sustainability in organizations. Did you have anything else that you wanted to mention there before we go on to the next one? Oh, right in the middle of a cough. All right, let's just get to the next article. And basically, it's not really an article. We are going to be talking about the Anti Slavery Collective and what they are all about. And this is kind of why Sarah is here today to talk about the mission, talk about what you are doing. Now, Sarah, I think, is there a royal connection to the Anti Slavery Collective?
There is indeed. So our charity was founded in 2017 by Princess Eugenie of the British royal family. Excuse me, as I said, well, I was in Davos last week, and it is such an intense week, so I'm still slightly recovering.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah, so we were set up. It was actually set up by Princess Eugenie and her very close friend Julia de Boinville. And they traveled to India and saw such extreme exploitation that they felt utterly compelled to set up an organization that would help convene leaders in business, technology, the political sphere to come together to talk about this.
Awesome. Awesome. So talk to us a little bit about why in 2025 you are focusing on supply chains as a part of your mission.
So, I mean, we have always focused on supply chains. It's always
Okay.
been a big focus of ours. In terms of fashion, our focus this year is going to be fast fashion, fake fashion, and luxury fashion, because I think all three of them together cover such a gigantic market. And fake fashion is certainly a new area of work for us. So we have done work with big brands before who are doing some pretty progressive work on their supply chains. Fake fashion is pretty fascinating because it has the same supply chains, but there is zero oversight, zero transparency. It is basically taking place in the shadows. Then you factor in fast fashion, which, there's been some huge controversies in the UK and elsewhere in the world about fast fashion. And I think when you take all of those three kind of areas of the fashion world, it basically covers absolutely everyone. It has universal relevance. So when it comes to us telling stories about modern slavery, it's a really helpful tool because it connects to absolutely everyone.
Well, and then explain to us what exactly is slavery? Like, what is it that supply chain professionals can do? But also explain to us, what we need to be looking out for, because I don't know if everybody has a good idea or even picture around what slavery is or could potentially look like in supply chains. If you've got an example to share as well, that also helps to put it into context so that we know what we're looking for.
And it is huge. I think when people think about historical slavery, they have this very visceral picture in their mind of what we're talking about. And I think the same is simply not true. And that's one of the biggest barriers in terms of my work, in our comms work. Maybe as an example, so I used to live in Myanmar for 8 years. And obviously Myanmar, one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, neighboring Thailand. A lot of very poor Myanmar men are recruited and are still recruited into the Thai fishing industry, which is absolutely enormous. When I was in Myanmar, I came across a man who worked in the warehouse of somebody I know's business. And he told this extraordinary story about how he was recruited to go and work on a fishing boat from a poor village in Myanmar. And he traveled out to Thailand and was taken, his papers were immediately taken away. He was taken out onto a small fishing trawler off the coast of Thailand, where he remained without ever coming to shore for 6 years. So larger vessels would come and bring water and supplies and food. And he and other men on that boat were held completely as prisoners on that boat. And there was, levels of degradation and suffering, abuse, violence that kept them working hard. They were given amphetamines every day so that they would work longer and faster. And this extraordinary man reached his breaking point. He stopped taking his amphetamines and he stored them up. And one night when he thought he would be closest to shore, he jumped over the side of the boat and he took the amphetamines and he swam for 2 days and 2 nights and he made it to shore so that he could tell his story. And he actually made his way back to Myanmar. And I know that's an extreme example, but the reason he was on that fish, he worked on a fishing trawler that picked up trash fish. It's basically the very small fish life that wouldn't make it to market, but is used in pet foods and lots of other kind of fertilizer products. Something that probably most of us use without even giving it a second thought. And I think that's kind of interesting about modern slavery. It's not just happening somewhere elsewhere and it's not connected to you. Your purchasing habits could well, without even thinking about it, be driving these kind of extreme exploitative practices. So I think that's a kind of really significant example, but that's extreme. But there's also modern slavery happening in Toronto and London and in villages and towns all across Canada, the US, the UK, the rest of Europe. It's not just something that's happening to very poor people in developing countries. It really is happening everywhere.
Yeah. And when you talk about, I thank you for sharing that story, and what an incredible story for him to be able to get back 2 days, 2 nights. I mean, you know, and what he went through. But I also think, you know, it's important to share stories like this, because supply chains, at the very beginning of supply chains, it's all around sourcing. Like you were talking about, tier 1 suppliers, tier 2, all the way down the line. Each one of those are suppliers to suppliers that you might be working with and doing business with. And so the right questions is really important. The reporting is really important. But again, with these regulations coming down, you're not going to be able to get away from that too much longer. And so you really need to start digging in and finding out where some of this stuff is coming from, what that looks like. Is there forced labor involved? Because it could mean that your product is stopped at the border and it's not going to come through. That product is capital intensive. Right? If it's about the bottom line for a lot of organizations, which it is, if your shipment is held at the border or it's denied entry, that capital is sitting out there and almost lost for you. And so it's not only the right thing to do, it's something that we all collectively need to start looking into and making sure that it's not part of our supply chains. Now, I want to get into the responsibility very quickly. We've got about a couple of minutes to talk about this. Now, this is our last article, and I want to, Berta, I'm going to tag Sarah because Berta had a question, so I'm going to tag you after the show to answer it. But also, I'm going to be putting the links on my personal LinkedIn after the show. So stay tuned for those links over on my personal LinkedIn. Now, I wanted to share this one because not only do supply chain leaders, supply chain professionals have a responsibility in this, but actually directors on boards of fashion companies, tech companies, supply chain companies, they actually have a responsibility as well. And so, you know, we have to, in our day-to-day lives, like you said, it's not only our buying habits. Yes, we can do that personally on a day-to-day basis. Professionally, there's a few things that we can do, and I don't think directors of boards understand this very well. So there's a new Canadian Forced Labor and Supply Chains Act. And this is only Canada, right? There's a lot of these acts around the EU and the UK as well. And they focus on modern slavery in supply chain, but they're making boards responsible. So directors on boards can be tied directly, if they can be tied directly to forced labor, if you're not looking into your tier 2, tier 3 and below, and you are signing off on the reporting, you can be responsible and fined. Talk to us about this. What did you think about this?
I mean, I think it's amazing. I'm really, really happy that it's coming out in Canada. And I think hopefully other countries will also follow suit. I mean, the UK brought out very similar legislation 10 years ago. It's the 10-year anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act this year. So it's kind of timely to see it happening in Canada. I think it's a really great opportunity to build on the lessons learned from the UK, because we had this really progressive legislation 10 years ago, but it didn't have a whole lot of bite. And so I think that's the big shift in the Canadian form, that there's a little bit more bite. And just as you say, having those board members on the hook for this stuff is really important. My only slight concern is a kind of risk management one, that corporates will become so risk averse that they'll choose not to build factories or, sign contracts with organizations in developing countries, countries that desperately need those contracts for workers who are really living on the kind of bottom line. So I really hope that people don't just leave
shy
certain
away.
countries, because I've seen that before in my own work where, there's a problem in a garment factory and a well-known brand will simply choose to leave rather than be part of the solution. So I feel like that would be just a really great thing if corporates could take on that responsibility, that more meaningful responsibility.
Well, and the boards bring that pressure to the organization. If I'm going to be responsible, here's what I need from you. One of the things that it said in the article was that there was results from reporting in May 2024. I don't have the results of that. I would have to look for the results, and maybe we'll do that in an upcoming episode. Because I'd love to sort of see how this transpires, this act, and how they put it into place and what that looks like. Well, listen, we have gone a little bit over, but that's okay because this is a very important topic. And Sarah, I would love to have you back on the show to talk about this and talk about where we're at maybe in 6 months or so. Thank you to everybody who weighed in. I know we had a ton of questions we didn't get to. But I really appreciate everybody for showing up today. And Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah, and for all your work in this area. It's incredible, and it's just really exciting to see someone with such passion. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.